Welcome to the course on Python. This is our first lesson on gentle introduction to Python. We're going to make use of the Microsoft Azure notebooks online so that you can actually get started quickly without worrying about the installation of all the Python software. So what I want you to do is actually type notebooks.azure. Let me just zoom in. notebooks.azure.com/Anthony Tyng. Okay, notebooks.azure.com/Anthony Tyng. Don't worry, I will provide the link for this as well so that you can actually directly come to this. You will come to this, there's libraries here, Python and 0 clones, and modified on 13th of February 2018. What you do need to do is actually come to this, and you can see all of these files that's provided here. There are 2 pages of them. There may be more as I add more files. Essentially, these are the codes for the whole Python course. So to begin with, what we do is actually we start with the first one, which is gentle introduction. Okay, you click that, it will bring up all the codes for you so you can actually follow along everything that I'm doing. So let me just close that off. In order for me to run them one by one, I do need to log in. So for you to actually be able to run and follow along when I'm actually running this course, you do need to log into a Hotmail or Outlook account or Live account. So once you're logged in, you'll see this green fonts here called running. All you have to do is actually select this gentle introduction 03. This is our first class, and you will see the so-called Jupyter Notebook. So this whole outlay is Jupyter Notebook. So you have the heading here, and this is running on Azure, so they call it Azure Notebooks, and this is the Python font, and these are the manual control. Okay, so let's just zoom in a little bit so that you can see clearly what I'm doing. Okay, so really this part is what I call an informal introduction to Python. Now I've provided a link here for you to actually refer to. This is the so-called original source of the codes. The purpose that I'm doing this is so that it's really about getting you started quickly, and I also want you to be able to refer back to the original documentation so that you actually have there's no cognitive dissonance for you, so that you can actually easily follow along. The codes are similar, but the examples are very, very different. I've modified to illustrate some of the concepts differently. Of course, you can go back to the source to look at it, and hopefully it should look familiar to you. Now let's start with this first cell here. You see that there's an in, there's a bracket here. This is what you will call a code cell. You can change that to a markdown, which is what this first block is. Notice that this highlights the first block. Markdown basically is another form of LaTeX. It's basically to write beautiful fonts, okay, for you to control the font types. Inside it, I provided a link so that you can actually open up this easily. Now this cell here, right, notice that it's now highlighted. It's called code. It's a code cell. So if you want to run this, what you need to do on your keyboard is press Shift, while holding that down, press Return. And then you will see this 1 pop up. Earlier it was empty, okay, like that. Now there's a 1. So that means that this has been run, this line of code has been run. And basically the line basically is a import sys, which is short for system, and print the system version. What I wanted to know is which version of Python am I running here. It's 3.63, Anaconda custom 64-bit. The default is November edition here. So it's telling me this is Anaconda, okay, version of Python. All right, so let's dive into it and look at using Python as a calculator. Now, a couple of things that we're going to learn from this is that, first of all, we learn about the various data types, integer, float, and also learn about operands, variable name, value assignment, and also determining the data types. Don't be too concerned if all of these is just too much information. We will go through this one by one just so that you are familiar with it. For a start, we're using Python as a calculator, all right, so that you actually learn how to interact with this Jupyter Notebook. Now, Jupyter Notebook is very popular amongst the scientists and also academics because it's great for sharing. As what I'm doing right now with you is fantastic for sharing. You've got the code now. As long as you logged in to your Hotmail, you can actually run with it. Alternatively, you can download this offline as well. You can actually run it on your own desktop or laptop as long as you have a Python version installed. Right, you probably still remember this PEMDAS. Basically, that's the order of operands. So we're going to go through these one by one. What is 2 plus 3? This is really addition, and hopefully that's not too, well, at least you are familiar with that. So you can actually press Shift, Return, or use this button here, Run. That will run the one cell. Okay, the input, this is cell number 2, is 2 plus 3. Okay, what you can see here is that I have used the hash, which means comment. Whatever that's after the hash will not be run. Basically, within the code cells, this is telling the Python that this is a comment. Okay, so don't run this part. So you have 2 plus 3. Thank goodness it works out to be 5 as we suspected. You can do likewise with 6 minus 4. Run it, and it gives you 2. And now, if you take 20, this is represent divide by 4. When you run it, you get 5.0. Notice there's a slight variation here. Here we have 5, and over here is 5.0. Now the 5.0 means that this is a float. A float meaning it's not an integer, it has decimals that follow with the whole number. So let's look at some multiplication now. If we run this cell, 6 times 7 is 42. Notice that that's an integer. And if you actually use parentheses, that takes priority over the operation order. And 3 plus 5 gives you 8, divided by 2 gives you 4. Notice that this is a float. If you take 21 divided by 4, which is a normal division, you get 5.25. A float division is double slash, okay, whereby the fractional part is actually discarded. And what you get is 5.0. Notice that the 1 over 4, the 0.25 part, is being completely removed. Alternatively, if you want the remainder, you can use the percentage sign, which gives you the remainder of the division of the leftover, okay, which is 20 divided by 4, and what's left is actually 1. And if you want to calculate power, this is 2 to the power of 4, which gives you 16. All right, so as you can see here, you can actually use Python as a calculator. It works just like a normal calculator that you operate on. And you can also combine multiple operators as well as mixing floating point numbers and integers as well. Now, when you actually mix integers and floating point, what you will get is actually floating point. Take, for example, we have 3 times 8.75 minus 2 dot. 2 dot here represent that this is actually a floating point. So when we run that, we get a floating point, a float, which is 24.25. Now, so far, what we've done here is that we use Python as a calculator. Now, I'm sure by now you find that, hey, this is a bit tedious. Every time I want to do some calculation, I need to actually type this in. What if I'm doing repetitive tasks that do I actually have to type this in every single time? That's the beauty of programming, is that you don't. You can actually store your value into a variable, okay? But you do need to give your variable a name. In this case, the variable name that we call it is no underscore rows. That means number of rows. So what we're doing here is assigning 5 to the variable called no rows, or number of rows. And when we run that, nothing is displayed. Okay, so let's just say, all right, what about number of rows, number of seats per row? Here we have 10. Now, I'm sure by now, hopefully, if you still remember your high school math, you are actually getting where we're going now. Is we're looking at how many seats are there in this room? There are in total 5 rows, and each row has 10 seats. How many seats are there? Okay, so let's run this, and what we get is 50. 5 times 10 is 50. So what you can see here is that you have store or assign the value 5 into a variable. So now you can keep using that variable again and again and again for other purpose. Now what happens if I haven't assigned a value to a variable? What will happen? Let's look at this case here. M, earlier we never made assign any value to it. So what would happen? Okay, as the comment probably by now tell you or informed you that you are going to get an error. Now, having an error like this is not the end of the world. It's basically Python giving you useful information for you to actually track down where you've done, where you've made a mistake. So what you have here is that the name error, all right, is telling us there's something wrong with the variable m. It's not defined, okay? So literally that's telling us that, hey, we have not defined or assigned a value to m, whether it's a string or integer. We haven't actually given it, assigned a value to it. Hence, we get this error message. Okay, so let's just recap. What we've covered is that we use Python as a calculator and also learn how to perform value assignment. Let's take a break and we'll come back and figure out how to determine a data type, because we've seen a couple of different data types now. We've seen integers, we've seen float. How do you tell which is which? So when we come back, we'll look into that.